Hi guys, good evening everyone. Welcome again to RBI 247. I see that a lot of students have been waiting for this session. We could not have a session on Tuesday because I was not well. I'm still not well. The cold seems to be getting worse and worse with time. And once you have it, it takes about 5 6 days. You can't do anything about it. No matter how many medicines you take, it doesn't go away. So yes, I've got the flu, and I'm going to be spending about 5 6 days with it. I decided that we'll have a session on Friday. We are not on Thursday. We are not going to compromise again on another session. So today we'll be discussing the State Finance Report 2023. Just give me a thumbs up whether you can see me and hear me clearly. Nafis is saying, I was a student of UPSC but now focusing on SEBI and RBI. I was studying for SEBI. There is no update. Can you help me with prep management? See, if you keep running around for different exams, then you might end up not clearing any one. So identify one focal point. If you're preparing for SEBI, then it makes sense to prepare for RBI as well. If you're preparing for RBI and simultaneously preparing for SEBI, even if SEBI doesn't come, keep preparing for RBI because you need that preparation. Okay, number one. Secondly, keep preparing for SEBI as well simultaneously because it might come around any time, and then you will feel that you ignored it in these past 15-20 days or a month, and then now you don't have enough time. So keep preparing for SEBI, keep preparing for RBI as well. इनमें से एक तो आएगा ही आएगा, RBI तो आएगा ही आएगा. SEBI might also come. If it comes, it will be beneficial for you. If it doesn't, you keep preparing for RBI because वो तो आने ही वाला है. So instead of running around for other examinations, I would recommend that you focus on these 2-3 exams and crack these exams in your first opportunity. Okay, चलिए start करते हैं. Let's start with the session. Let me just, yes, so I have got the slide now. Wonderful. So today we are going to discuss the state finance report. It's going to be a lengthy report. It is a lengthy topic. और state finance report has been released by RBI. And RBI ने बहुत सारी चीज़ें डिस्कस की हैं. At the end, I will be talking about what RBI has recommended as well to the states to improve their finances. So RBI's recommendations will also be discussed towards the end. Therefore, I would recommend कि आप पूरा सेशन देखो. थोड़ा सा heavy लग सकता है because I will be talking about revenues, expenses, deficits, loans, a lot of numbers, a lot of figures, a lot of things. You might get overwhelmed, but 2-3 बार देखोगे तो it will become clear to you. स्टार्ट करते हैं. छह टर्मिनोलॉजीज हैं या फिर 6 एरियाज हैं जो हम डिस्कस करने की कोशिश करेंगे. We will talk about expenditure, both revenue as well as capital. We will talk about receipts, both revenue as well as capital. We will talk about deficits, both fiscal and revenue deficit. And we will also try and talk about loans. And finally, we will discuss RBI's recommendations on how the states can improve their finances. Okay. Revenues की अगर हम बात करें, we start with revenues. States are anticipating an increase in non-tax revenue. तो revenues को divide कर दिया हमने 2 parts में. There would be non-tax revenue and there would be tax revenue, which is very obvious. Tax revenue जो taxes के through states को मिलता है, both through vertical devolution. अब vertical devolution कोई बता सकता है क्या होता है? Vertical devolution, if you know, please type it in the chat box, जिससे कि मुझे पता लगे कि किस किस को आता है. Vertical devolution FRBM के अंडर और फाइनेंस कमीशन की जो रिपोर्ट आती है उसके अंदर भी आता है. Let's say we have GST. Now GST is divided into IGST, SGST, CGST. तो इंटीग्रेटेड GST जो भी लगता है, जो भी आप कोर्स खरीदते हो मुझसे, मैं इंटीग्रेटेड GST पे करता हूँ उस पर. So I am paying 18% integrated GST on all of that. All of this is going to the center. ये center को जा रहा है. But the center doesn't get to keep all this money. The center has to now transfer this money or part with a certain proportion or portion of this money and give it to the states as well. Because ultimately I am working from some state. मैं भी दिल्ली में बैठ के आपको पढ़ा रहा हूँ, तो मैं दिल्ली के रिसोर्सेज यूज कर रहा हूँ. So the money should also go to the states in some or the other form. Now this is called as vertical devolution. तो टैक्स में अलग अलग टाइप के टैक्स हो सकते हैं. जब हम इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स की बात करते हैं तो उसमें the center makes some taxes, collects some taxes, gives a part of it to the states collect some taxes directly as well. नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यूज, फाइन्स वगैरह, आप जो माइंस के रॉयल्टीज लेते हो, प्रीमियम्स लेते हो, ऑल दोज थिंग्स विल बी टॉकिंग अबाउट दोज. ओके, अगर हम whatever is mentioned here, we come to that. States are anticipating an increase in non-tax revenue, which is generated from sources such as fees, fines, royalties. इन सब से जो पैसा आता है, anticipation है कि ये बढ़ेगा. There is a considerable scope for states to increase non-tax revenue through revisions in user charges on electricity, water and other public services. अब water के केस में क्या होता है, दिल्ली में तो फिर भी if you use water you have to pay a lot of money. In other states the charges on water is still very low because it is considered a vote bank, important vote bank for the government. So the government keeps subsidizing water. इसकी वजह से क्या होता है, the government ends up incurring a lot of losses. That is why the quality of water is also not very good. You have to put all those ROs and those kind of fancy stuff in order to make sure that you get clean water, because the user charges have not been revised in a long time. Okay, तो यहाँ बोलते हैं कि यूजर चार्जेस को बढ़ाने की जरूरत है. We need to rationalize them. Royalties and premiums for mining, better financial management of the public sector units. Public sector units खाली सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के नहीं है, स्टेट्स के भी होते हैं. उनकी बेटर मैनेजमेंट होगी, ऑटोमेटिकली उनका रेवेन्यू बढ़ेगा. दिस इज वेयर एक रिकमेंडेशन टाइप हो गई या फ्यूचर ओरिएंटेशन हो गया कि states can increase the non-tax revenue by changing all these things. The implementation of GST has led to an increased tax buoyancy to the states. Now it was expected that GST will result in losses to the states. That's what the states were claiming. It was also expected that GST would result in a loss of control over taxation for the states, and the control will pass on to the central government. It was also expected that GST आने से states का जो overall revenue है, tax revenue है, वो कम हो जाएगा. But all these things have not happened. Control से कोई problem नहीं हुई है because GST council sits regularly. Revenues of the states from GST have also increased, and losses जो पहले होते थे वो भी कम हुए हैं. This can be done while the overall tax efforts of the states are strong. Further improvement in tax revenues is required. इसके लिए टैक्स रिफॉर्म्स की जरूरत है और टैक्स एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को इंप्रूव करने की जरूरत है, जिसमें टैक्स इवेजन वगैरह भी आ जाता है. तो ये हमारा हो गया बेसिक डिस्कशन रेवेन्यूज में टैक्स के पार्ट पे. अब टैक्स में भी ये फर्दर डिवीजन है, स्टेट्स का अपना टैक्स रेवेन्यू, स्टेट्स ओन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. इफ यू टॉक अबाउट दैट, the state owned tax revenue has grown from 5.7% to 6.9% of GDP. तो GDP का अगर हम proportion ले तो about 7% of GDP. In order to help you remember it better, approximation करो, ज़्यादा अच्छे से याद आएगा. About 7% of GDP comes to states as their own tax revenue. Okay. After GST, SGST became the primary source, followed by VAT, sales tax, excise duty, vehicle tax. क्योंकि जीएसटी अब सेंट्रल के पास चला गया, उसमें से कुछ प्रोपोर्शन ही स्टेट के पास आता है. देयरफॉर टैक्स रेवेन्यू में एसजीएसटी, सेल्स टैक्स, एक्साइज, इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स की अगर हम बात करें, दीज हैव बिकम द मेजर सोर्सेज ऑफ रेवेन्यू फॉर द स्टेट. एसओटीआर मतलब स्टेट का अपना टैक्स रेवेन्यू. द प्रोपोर्शन, द कलेक्शन ऑल्सो वेरीज अ लॉट. ओके, अगर ओवरऑल टैक्स रेवेन्यू की बात करें हम, ओवरऑल टैक्स रेवेन्यू ऑफ अ स्टेट, लेट्स से अ टैक्स कलेक्ट्स 100 रुपीज एज इट्स टोटल टैक्स रेवेन्यू, इतना रेवेन्यू आता है टैक्स से. उसमें से स्टेट का अपना टैक्स रेवेन्यू कितना है? यू विल सी हेयर मेजर इंडस्ट्रियलाइज्ड स्टेट्स लाई एट द टॉप. हरियाणा, महाराष्ट्र, तेलंगाना, तमिलनाडु, गुजरात, कर्नाटका. उसके नीचे सारी ये ऐसी स्टेट्स आ रही हैं, बिहार, उत्तराखंड, बिहार, झारखंड, उड़ीसा, उत्तर प्रदेश, which are not industrialized, जहाँ पे इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन अभी अच्छे से नहीं हुआ है. These are at the bottom, which means that in Haryana about 86.9 rupees comes from taxes. The remaining comes from other areas. State का अपना टैक्स रेवेन्यू forms 86.9%, which means the state is independent in terms of its revenue generation. But जो ये states है नीचे वाली, बिहार, झारखंड, उड़ीसा, उत्तर प्रदेश, यहाँ टैक्स कलेक्शन बहुत खराब. Therefore, they're always reliant on the center to provide them with grants or certain kind of receipts जिससे कि उनका खर्चा चल सके. ओके, तो ये हमने यहाँ पे समझ लिया. स्टेट का अपना टैक्स रेवेन्यू हैज इंक्रीज्ड टू अबाउट 7% ऑफ जीडीपी. और अगर हम इफ यू टॉक अबाउट द ओवरऑल टैक्स रेवेन्यू में से व्हाट इज द स्टेट्स ओन टैक्स रेवेन्यू, देन द एवरेज ऑफ ऑल द स्टेट्स इज अबाउट 65%, विच मीन्स 100 रुपये टैक्स कलेक्ट कर रहे हो तो 65 रुपये स्टेट अपना टैक्स खुद का जनरेट करके कलेक्ट कर रही है. हरियाणा लाइज एट द टॉप ऑफ दिस. ओके, दिस इज ऑल अबाउट ओन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. छोटे छोटे पार्ट्स में मैंने इसे डिवाइड किया है। ओन नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू, SONTR, स्टेट का अपना नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू, ये कम होता जा रहा है। दिस इज वाई फर्स्ट पेज पे हमने रिकमेंडेशन देखी थी दैट वी नीड टू इंप्रूव और इंक्रीज द ओवरऑल रेवेन्यू ऑफ द स्टेट्स थ्रू नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू, जिसमें कि फाइन्स आ जाते हैं, रॉयल्टीज आ जाती हैं, ये सब हमें बढ़ाने की जरूरत है। अंदर 10% ऑफ ओवरऑल रेवेन्यू, जितने भी ओवरऑल टैक्स रेवेन्यूज आते हैं स्टेट के, उसका अराउंड 10% ही हमारा नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू बन पाता है। द रिमेनिंग इज टैक्स रेवेन्यू ओनली। उसमें से भी कुछ पार्ट स्टेट का अपना है, कुछ पार्ट द रिमेनिंग पार्ट द सेंटर प्रोवाइड्स टू द स्टेट्स। ओके, इकोनॉमिक सर्विसेज कंट्रीब्यूट अराउंड 60% ऑफ द नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू। तो जितना भी नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू कह लेते, सिंप्लीफाई करें, 100 रुपये पूरा रेवेन्यू आया, अब 100 रुपये में से 10 रुपये नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू है, NTR है। ओके, एंड लेट्स से अराउंड 90 रुपीज इज टैक्स रेवेन्यू, TR। अब इस नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू में से 60% विच वुड बी 6 रुपीज कम्स फ्रॉम इकोनॉमिक सर्विसेज। फॉर एग्जाम्पल इंडस्ट्रीज, पावर, इरिगेशन प्रोजेक्ट्स, ये प्रोजेक्ट्स के थ्रू मिलता है। द रिमेनिंग कम्स फ्रॉम नॉन इकोनॉमिक सर्विसेज, जैसे फाइन हो गया। स्टेट्स आर सीकिंग वेज टू एक्सपैंड नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू। रिफॉर्म्स इंक्लूड ई ऑक्शंस फॉर माइनिंग लीज, माइन लीज पे डालोगे, उसका ऑक्शन होगा, उसका पैसा मिलेगा, गवर्नमेंट विल गेट मनी आउट ऑफ दैट। उसमें पैसा बढ़ाने की जरूरत है, ऑक्शन का प्राइस, उसमें करप्शन ना हो। रिवाइज्ड माइनिंग रॉयल्टीज, द रॉयल्टीज ऑन माइनिंग ऑल्सो नीड्स टू इंक्रीज। लैंड मोनेटाइजेशन, जो भी whatever land belongs to the government lying idle, that needs to be monetized. Very basic example, let's say you have a hospital, और हॉस्पिटल की साइड में बहुत सारा खाली लैंड पड़ा हुआ है, एंड दिस लैंड बिलोंग्स टू द गवर्नमेंट एंड द हॉस्पिटल स्टार्ट्स इलीगली यूजिंग इट एज अ पार्किंग एरिया। वेरी बेसिक एग्जाम्पल है ना। लोगों को अच्छा लगता है, फ्री पार्किंग मिल रही है, या फिर समटाइम्स द हॉस्पिटल इटसेल्फ स्टार्ट्स चार्जिंग, 10-10 रुपए लेके वो अपनी जेबें भरते हैं। Now this is monetization of land. The government realizes that this land belongs to us. It does not belong to any private property, private person, and let's give it on lease to some party, to some contractor, and start a parking in that area because there is already demand. There is already a need for it. That's how the state can monetize land and can make money out of it. तो ये सारा नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू है। ओके, रिवाइज वाटर रेट्स फॉर इंडस्ट्रीज, इंडस्ट्रीज यूज अ मेजर पार्ट। एग्रीकल्चर में जो भी whatever water is used, that is not taxable, that is not chargeable. So water charges are levied on industries only. उसके रेट्स बढ़ाने की या चेंज करने की जरूरत है। ये हमने यहाँ पे लिख दिया नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू का शेयर। ऑल द रिमेनिंग थिंग्स आर नॉट वेरी यूजफुल। यहाँ तक समझ आ गया। States need better revenue forecast for improved fiscal management. The following states are taking various measures to boost revenue. Now let's understand what the states are doing. अभी states क्या क्या कर रही हैं। हमने अभी तक देख लिया कि रेवेन्यू के डिवीजन है नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू और टैक्स रेवेन्यू, दोनों का प्रोपोर्शन कितना है वो हमने समझ लिया। केरला एंड कर्नाटका, southern states aim to increase tax collection by aligning property values. Kerala plans to revise mineral royalties to augment non-tax revenue. माइंस एंड मिनरल्स जो होते हैं उनकी रॉयल्टीज बढ़ाने का वो काम कर रही हैं। हिमाचल प्रदेश सद्भावना योजना एड्रेसेस पेंडिंग टैक्स केसेस। तो हिमाचल प्रदेश ने योजना निकाली सद्भावना योजना। व्हाट इज द ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ दिस? जो भी पेंडिंग टैक्स केसेस हैं, इश्यूज हैं, उसको रिजॉल्व करो। वन टाइम एमनेस्टी स्कीम प्रोवाइड करो। द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ऑल्सो केम आउट विद इट सम टाइम बैक। Similarly, something can be done by the states as well. Himachal Pradesh is doing it. Maharashtra and Rajasthan amnesty scheme to resolve pending cases. Similar. States are introducing new cesses, जैसे कि केरला का social security cess on liquor and fuel sales. Delhi is setting up a dedicated unit to enhance tax collections using technology. जैसे faceless technology आजकल आई है, या फिर आप जैसे 50 as soon as you withdraw more than 50,000 in cash, a message goes to the tax authorities and now they can verify your accounts. They can verify your income tax statements. So that is how they try and catch tax evasion. That's how technology can help them. I hope this is clear. यहाँ तक clear है? One second. Okay. Vertical fiscal imbalance. What is vertical fiscal imbalance? Let's try and understand this. The fiscal gap arises due to disparity between revenue generation capacity and expenditure responsibility across different government tiers. For example, revenue generation capacity of, let's say, Haryana is 100 rupees, but expenditure की जो responsibility है वो 200 रुपए की है. It has to spend 200 on various social welfare activities, on various other kinds of things, but उसकी revenue generation capacity 100 रुपए ही है बस. तो यहाँ पे एक फिस्कल इम्बैलेंस क्रिएट हो रहा है. दिस इज गोइंग टू रिजल्ट इन टू फिस्कल डेफिसिट फॉर द स्टेट बिकॉज द स्टेट कैन नॉट डू एनीथिंग अबाउट इट. इट कैन नॉट रिड्यूस इट्स एक्सपेंडिचर, ऑल आर नेसेसरी. इट इज अनेबल टू इंक्रीज इट्स रेवेन्यूज. इसको क्या बोलते हैं, हम यहां से आगे चलते हैं. वर्टिकल फिस्कल इम्बैलेंस रेफर्स टू द गैप बिटवीन हाउ मच मनी डिफरेंट लेवल्स ऑफ गवर्नमेंट कैन कलेक्ट एंड हाउ मच दे स्पेंड. द इम्बैलेंस अफेक्ट्स डेट डेफिसिट ऑफ द ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी. This arises because the central government has more powers to collect taxes. अब ये क्यों हो रहा है? The reason behind this is called as vertical fiscal imbalance. Now, the state might have a capability to generate revenue through taxes and other things of, let's say, around 300, but it is not able to do so because यहाँ पे एक central government बैठी है, and the central government has taken over a lot of areas where taxes could be levied. तो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने खुद कलेक्ट कर लिए टैक्सेस, नॉट गिविंग द पावर टू द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट टू कलेक्ट दोस टैक्सेस, रिजल्टिंग इन द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स रेवेन्यू जनरेशन slowing down or getting lower because the central government has occupied all these areas where it could collect taxes, and now it is, if it is not devolving those revenues from those taxes to the state government, then the state government faces a fiscal deficit which is called as vertical fiscal imbalance. ये होता है vertical fiscal imbalance. I hope this is clear. बहुत बेसिक सी चीज है, ये मैं आपको समझाना चाह रहा था यहाँ पर. अब यहाँ पे because we are talking about revenues, tax revenues, non-tax revenues, that is why fiscal imbalance comes into play. We had this feeling, and when GST came, everybody was arguing that because of GST, the vertical fiscal imbalance will increase. Because GST was giving power to the center to collect all these taxes and then to devolve a part of these taxes to the states. So the state said, you will not give us enough money, and this will result in more vertical fiscal imbalance in your favor. You will have more money, we will have less money. But the same has not happened. That is what this report has claimed. It has stained around 0.48 to 0.51 from this area. This improvement is due to states collecting more revenue through SGST since 2021-22. अब ये हुआ क्यों है? The reason that is given by the report is that states, because of GST, the compliance has increased, which means that the people who were not paying taxes before, people who were not paying indirect taxes before, are now paying taxes, have to pay taxes because GST के अंदर compliance इतना automatic और इतना strong हो चुका है that people cannot escape. And when they pay taxes, they don't just pay IGST, they also pay SGST at a lot of places. वो खाली IGST पे नहीं करते, SGST भी पे करते हैं. When they do that, ultimately the state government earns this revenue. Because of this, despite the fear that GST will give more power of collection to the central government, it has resulted in more tax revenues for the state government as well. Okay, and that is why the vertical fiscal imbalance has not increased. I hope this is clear. ये स्टेट फाइनेंस रिपोर्ट का एनालिसिस था अबाउट रेवेन्यू. ओके, अब आ जाते हैं एक्सपेंडिचर के ऊपर. आई होप दिस इज क्लियर. एक्सपेंडिचर में देर आर रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर, ये तो आपको पता ही है. देर इज कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर एंड देन देर इज एक्सपेंडिचर ऑन R&D, रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट, विच इज वेरी लेस, बहुत कम है एज अ परसेंटेज ऑफ GDP. देख लेते हैं एक बार क्या क्या है. When we talk about revenue expenditure मतलब recurring expenditure, हर साल जो normal expenditure हो रहा है, that is revenue expenditure. In 2022-23 पहले ही देख लेते हैं. Overall state spending was higher, but with reduced relief in natural disasters, urban development, agriculture and rural. इन सब में कम expenditure state ने किया है. नॉट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है. समबडी इज जस्ट मेंशन कि सर इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट साथ में बताते जाइए, आई डू दैट. देयर वाज एन इंक्रीज स्पेंडिंग इन पावर सेक्टर एंड हेल्थ केयर. ये इंपॉर्टेंट है. हम लोग क्या कर रहे हैं, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ा रहे हैं, बोथ द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट्स एंड द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स, एंड पावर इज अ मेजर पार्ट ऑफ दैट. ओके, 2021-22 एक साल पहले जाएंगे. रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर डिक्लाइंड, states allocated more funds to development expenditure due to challenges brought by second wave, non development expenditure decreased. अब expenditures का जो classification है, it can be classified as revenue and capital expenditure, or it can be classified as development and non development expenditure. Either or है ये, and नहीं है ये. Okay, either you do this or you do this, you can't do both. Okay, अगर दोनों करने तो रेवेन्यू में फर्दर डिवीजन करोगे, डेवलपमेंट नॉन डेवलपमेंट, कैपिटल में डेवलपमेंट नॉन डेवलपमेंट. दैट इज नॉर्मली नॉट डन बाय द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स. तो हमने क्लासिफिकेशन किया या तो रेवेन्यू कैपिटल और डेवलपमेंट नॉन डेवलपमेंट. इनफैक्ट दिस इज ऑल्सो नॉट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. 2022-23 में ये समझना इंपॉर्टेंट है दैट आर एक्सपेंडिचर्स ऑन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ पावर एंड हेल्थ केयर दैट हैव इंक्रीज्ड. ओके, in 2024 states plan to allocate about 15% of GDP for revenue expenditure with 8% specifically for social sector expenses. जितना भी जीडीपी है उसका अराउंड 15%, 14.5% के आसपास दे आर एक्सपेक्टिंग कि वो रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर में डालेंगे, एंड 8% जो है वो सोशल सेक्टर एक्सपेंसेस में डालेंगे. ओके, आई होप दिस इज क्लियर. अभी नंबर्स देखेंगे तो और क्लियर हो जाएगा. यस, नेक्स्ट आता है कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर. इन 22 कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इंक्रीज बाय 14%. ये ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है, टोटल नंबर्स इंपॉर्टेंट है, वो अभी मैं दिखाऊंगा. 21 में स्टेट सॉ सिग्निफिकेंट राइज ऑफ 29% इन कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर ड्यू टू इंक्रीज टैक्स एंड नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यूज एंड पेमेंट्स फ्रॉम सेंटर फॉर टैक्स शेयरिंग. दिस इनेबल्ड मोर स्पेंडिंग इन एग्रीकल्चर, फूड स्टोरेज एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. तो अगर हम कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर की बात करें तो उसमें देयर वाज अ सिग्निफिकेंट राइज इन 2021-22. और रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर में हमने यहाँ पे देखो, ये दीज आर नॉट कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर्स, दीज आर रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर्स इन पावर एंड हेल्थ केयर. रेवेन्यू और पावर और हेल्थ केयर में, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में रिकरिंग एक्सपेंडिचर हमने बढ़ाया है. दिस माइट ऑल्सो बी बिकॉज इन द प्रीवियस ईयर्स सिंस कोविड एंड इवन बिफोर कोविड वी हैव बीन इंक्रीजिंग आवर कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. आपको वो दिख भी रहा है, रोड्स रेलवेज में काफ़ी इन्वेस्टमेंट हो रहा है. अब ये सब इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में इन्वेस्ट तो कर दिया, बट इनकी मेंटेनेंस भी करनी है, एंड मेंटेनेंस पार्ट कम्स अंडर रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. दैट इज व्हाट वी आर सीइंग हियर कि रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर की जो डिमांड है अब इन दीज एरियाज दैट इज ऑल्सो इंक्रीजिंग बिकॉज ऑफ आवर प्रीवियस इन्वेस्टमेंट्स इन कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. ओके, लुकिंग अहेड, फ्यूचर में क्या सोच रहे हैं? स्टेट्स आर प्लानिंग अ सब्सटैंशियल 43% इंक्रीज इन कैपिटल स्पेंडिंग अमाउंटिंग टू 2.9% ऑफ जीडीपी. ये याद रखना जरूरी है. टोटल कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर ऑफ द स्टेट्स इज अबाउट 3% ऑफ जीडीपी. इतना याद रखना जरूरी है. हर साल इंक्रीज कितना हो रहा है दैट इज नॉट वेरी रेलेवेंट. टू एनकरेज हायर कैपिटल स्पेंडिंग द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ऑल्सो गिव्स लोन्स एंड ग्रांट्स. तो यहाँ पे सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने एक स्कीम चलाई फॉर स्पेशल असिस्टेंस टू स्टेट्स फॉर कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट. उसमें लोन दिया 1.3 लाख करोड़ का, मेकिंग अ 30% इंक्रीज ओवर द प्रीवियस ईयर. तो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट लोन देती है स्टेट्स को, एंड दीज लोन्स आर स्पेसिफिक लोन्स गिवन फॉर कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट ओनली. तो यहाँ पे सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने काफ़ी स्पेशल स्कीम्स के थ्रू दे आर इंक्रीजिंग द अमाउंट ऑफ मनी दैट द स्टेट्स कैन टेक फ्रॉम द सेंटर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ लोन्स. आई होप दिस इज क्लियर. अब आ जाते हैं एक्सपेंडिचर ऑन रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट. तो कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर क्लियर है, रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर क्लियर है. लेट्स कम टू एक्सपेंडिचर ऑन R&D. बहुत कम है. R&D पे एक्सपेंडिचर हैज इंक्रीज फ्रॉम 0.07% to 0.1% ऑफ जीडीपी. ओके, हेल्थ केयर रिलेटेड R&D बढ़ा है, एग्रीकल्चर रिलेटेड R&D कम हुआ है. दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट, दिस नंबर इज इंपॉर्टेंट. ओके, द प्लान्ड रेशियो ऑफ रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर टू कैपिटल आउटले, दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट. रेको का मतलब होता है रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर टू कैपिटल आउटले. जितना कम है उतना बढ़िया है. क्यों कम है तो अच्छा क्यों है? इफ रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर टू कैपिटल आउटले, जितना कम रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर होगा, लेट्स से योर रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर इज 100 एंड थ्रू दिस रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर ऑफ 100 द कैपिटल outlay that you're getting is 200. On the other hand, there is another situation where your revenue expenditure is still 100 but your capital outlay is 300. Which one is better, the first one or the second one? The second one is better. Why? Because यहाँ पे revenue expenditure कम हुआ, capital outlay has increased, is not 200 now, it is 300. This is what makes it better. But revenue expenditure to capital outlay ratio here is 1/3, here it is 1/2. So the lesser revenue expenditure to capital outlay, the better it is. So here we have the revenue expenditure to capital outlay. This is also decreased from 6 in 22-23 to 5 in 23-24. This is our expectation. Now this is good, and this is something that can be asked in the examination. Okay, interview या phase 2 में especially this can be asked. Revenue expenditure to capital outlay, that is expected to reduce, that is already decreasing. Okay, both center and states are modernizing their banking services and fund transfer systems through a single nodal agency. This initiative aims to strengthen the country's public fund disbursal process. So you're trying to create a single nodal agency which can help in modernizing the banking practices of the states specifically. The states' banking practices are still very old compared to the center. So they're trying to do that. Their expenses will reduce, corruption will also reduce. Okay. States plan to allocate about 0.09% for R&D in 24, mainly focusing on medical, health, family welfare, etc. etc. It was 0.1% in 2022-23. They're thinking कि हम 0.09% डालेंगे. These numbers are, yes, important. Okay. Now summarizing, let's come to expenditure pattern of state governments and UTs. Combine अगर करके देखें तो किस तरह का है. Either you can add these two, revenue, as I said, revenue expenditure plus capital expenditure, or you can add these three, development expenditure plus non-development expenditure plus various others, which is miscellaneous kind of expenditure. So you can see here that revenue expenditure in 23 is about 36.84, 37 lakh crore. This is in lakh crore. Okay. Capital expenditure is so less. It's about, once again, it's about 6.82 lakh crore. It's very less. Okay. If we come to development expenditure, then this is about 33.22 lakh crore and non-development is about 14 lakh crore. Now this is good that development expenditure is more, but majority of this development expenditure is not capital, it's still revenue expenditure, because you can see here revenue expenditure forms a majority of the total expenditure of the states. This is what we need to change as well, not completely but to a certain extent. Our capital expenditure needs to increase, and it is good that our development expenditure in our revenue expenditure is very high. But our non-development expenditure is also still very high. We can also work on reducing this. I hope this is clear. ठीक है ना? Capital outlay मतलब कितना उस पे outcome आया. What is the outcome that you're witnessing through that? Okay. Actual outcomes in 23-24 till date. Fiscal deficit की अगर हम बात करें, let's talk about loans and deficit. Deficit is what? Expenditure minus revenue. The excess of expenditure over revenue. If your revenue is less, expenditure is more, you are going to be in deficit. This is called as fiscal deficit. Okay. Higher consolidated government fiscal deficit due to slower revenue receipts and more capital expenditure. तो हमारा जो fiscal deficit है states का, that has increased. And why has that increased? Because the revenue receipts have gone down, but the capital expenditure has still up, is still very high. Now this is beneficial to a certain extent, because if you're investing all this money in good infrastructure projects which are going to give you good returns in the future, then this revenue receipts will sharply increase in the future. For example, आपने solar plants में आज लगा दिए 10 लाख करोड़. For example, 10 lakh crore UP decides to put in solar power plants. It does that. For the next 5 years or 10 years, you might see that this is resulting in more or high deficits for the UP government. But after 10 years, or as this solar power plant starts working, they will immediately start noticing that their expenditures, non-developmental recurring expenditures are going down. They do not have to rely on some other non-renewable source for energy. They have easy, cheap, renewable source of energy at their disposal. They can also sell this energy to other states. So their receipts might also start going up. These are the advantages of good investment or good capital expenditure. Okay, I hope this is clear. Tax and non-tax revenue growth has slowed, with grants from the center declining due to GST compensation cessation. Now, GST के अंदर the states were getting some compensation from the states, and this was supposed to be done for 5 years. After that, it could not be renewed. The states were demanding that please give us more time. We need more money from you in the form of GST compensation, but the center declined. And now the GST compensation has stopped, because of which the tax revenue of the states has gone down, because ये सारा compensation मिल रहा था, tax revenue में जा रहा था. Now this is not happening anymore. Okay. States GST has shown more growth, वो हमने discuss किया था अभी. That is good. Tax devolution from the center has increased due to high income tax and GST collection, and also because of the 15th Finance Commission, जिसने बहुत ज़्यादा, more than 42% of the overall collections of the center have to go to the states in the form of devolution, which is very high. Revenue expenditure growth has slowed to 8.9%, excluding interest payments, not very important. Capital outlay surged by 52%, supported by scheme for special assistance to states for capital investment. Capital outcome जो है states का, that has increased because of capital investment by the center in the form of loans through two states. Okay, तो ये हमने देख लिया बेसिक से. बेसिक आउटलाइन है फिस्कल डेफिसिट की, both positives as well as negatives. States fiscal outlook and borrowing requirements. Fiscal outlook is positive due to resilient domestic economic activity and consolidation efforts. Now, the central government is also saying the same thing, state government, and now RBI is also saying the same thing कि domestic economic demand जो है वो हमारी बहुत अच्छी है. We are consolidating all the different kinds of projects and making sure that we are able to integrate everything. So all these are going to contribute towards the growth of states in the future as well. Okay. आगे चलते हैं. Let's come to fiscal deficit now. Gross fiscal deficit की financing किस तरह से हो रही है, and what are the numbers of fiscal deficit? Both these things are important. States' reliance on market borrowing has increased. Now this is very interesting and very important. कि states ना अपने deficit को finance करने के लिए they are not going and using the center's resources as much as they used to. Now they are borrowing more from the market, which is good thing, because as soon as the states ratings become bad or worse and worse, automatically their borrowing will become more expensive. As their borrowings become more expensive, automatically they will try to work out a way to improve their situation. Otherwise, if they keep borrowing and the costs keep going up, they will go bankrupt, and they don't want that to happen. So market borrowing makes sure that the market pressures of supply and demand keep pushing them to be efficient, which is good. Okay, this is something that you can remember. No numbers, but good analysis. Their reliance on market borrowings has increased significantly because of recommendation of 14th Finance Commission. States' dependency on net market borrowing rose to over 90% but has declined since. मतलब बढ़ गया है काफी ज्यादा हमारा market borrowing पे reliance. Okay, the gross market borrowing around 18 lakh crore in 23 from 7 lakh crore in previous year, which is very high. Net market borrowings rose by 5.4%, not very important, but yes, this is important. 5.19 lakh crore. Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, Assam. These are what? Majority of them are industrialized states. So more industrialized states are using market borrowing to raise more money and to use that money for capital expenditure, which is good. State governments and UTs have also been now allowed to use ways and means advances. इसकी लिमिट जो है उनकी 47,000 crore की है. Number is not very important. States can access OD for 14 consecutive days, remain in OD for a maximum of 30 days, 36 days. Now, what is this? Number one, these are all numbers that you need to remember. Number two, these are market-oriented methods that the states can now follow to borrow money and to use that money for capital expenditure. That is why this is all important, and this is all a good sign that the states are using overdraft facility, states are using ways and means advances instead of using non-market methods like looking for grants from the center, looking for loans from international institutions at very low rates. All those were not very sustainable. Okay. cash management of state governments. In recent times, states have saved considerable cash in intermediate treasury bills and auction treasury bills. ये थोड़ा टेक्निकल है, I would not want to get into it a lot. But what are treasury bills? Treasury bills are ways to raise money in the short run. आपको शॉर्ट टर्म में 15-20 दिन, 91 days, 182 days, थोड़े टाइम के लिए, if you need money to run operations or make some investments, you do that by raising money through treasury bills. These are nothing but bonds, short-term bonds. Okay. Now, states have been using these methods in order to raise money, in order to have cash. Okay. While these surpluses imply low financial pressure, they incur negative interest cost, urging better cash management. Now, this has both positive and negative side. Positive side is you're using market-oriented methods like treasury bills to raise money. Negative side is इसमें आपको कुछ ना कुछ interest भी देना पड़ता है. So now the states also have to incur this interest cost. So the states have to learn to use these methods proactively, but at the same time cautiously. Okay. The summary or the learning from this entire slide about gross fiscal deficit is that the states are now able to use and also willing to use more market oriented methods and tools for raising money, for balancing the difference between their expenditure and revenues. And these have more advantages, both advantages and disadvantages. Advantage ये है that you are now using and relying upon the concept of supply and demand for money. If you keep borrowing, ultimately people will not be willing to lend you anymore, and you will have to check your shop. You will have to improve your working. So this is good. Keeps a good market check. The negative side is there is interest cost involved. So in the long run, you might go bankrupt if you're not efficient with this. So this is the analysis that you can take home from this slide about fiscal deficit. I hope this is clear. यहाँ तक क्लियर है? ओके, आगे चलते हैं. States के reserve funds, let's talk about that. States maintain the following with RBI to handle future liabilities. They can access the special drawing facility, which is nothing but reverse repo rate, by investing more in CSF and GRF. What is CSF? Consolidated Sinking Fund and Redemption Fund. So these are the places where the states can invest through the Reserve Bank. Consolidated Sinking Fund is a reserve fund established by states. Its purpose is to ensure availability of funds to meet future liabilities, particularly debt repayment. It builds a financial cushion for future reimbursements. So it's a sinking fund method which is built up by state. जैसे मैंने 100 रुपये बचाए इस महीने की सैलरी में से, and I've given it to the RBI, and RBI has put it in a sinking fund called as Consolidated Sinking Fund. This is what states use to preserve whatever reserves or whatever profits or whatever extra money they have. Second is Guarantee Redemption Fund. According to recommendations of 12th Finance Commission, 15 states have set up the Guarantee Redemption Fund. Not to be used for any other purpose except for redemption of loans. जो भी स्टेट ने लोन लिया है, मैंने लोन लिया था 1 लाख करोड़ का, and this was supposed to be paid back, let's say in 2025. Okay, I had taken this loan in 2015 for 10 years to be paid back in 2025. Now, again, immediately in 2025, I might not have this much money. But if every year I keep 10,000 crore, I deposit 10,000 crore in my Guarantee Redemption Fund, then by 2025, I would automatically have 1 lakh crore or more than 1 lakh crore. So this is the idea of Guarantee Redemption Fund. It's like putting aside money from your revenues so that whatever loan liabilities will arise in the future, repayment liabilities, you're able to meet those. So states are doing these two things, depositing money with RBI in the form of Consolidated Sinking Fund as well as Guarantee Redemption Fund. ये दोनों याद रखने important हैं. These are things that the state governments do with RBI. इसलिए पूछा जा सकता है. Okay, I hope this is clear. Outstanding liabilities of the state governments in 2023 about 28% debt to GDP ratio. Debt मतलब loan. तो total जितना भी GDP है उसका about 28% is loan of the states. इतना लोन स्टेट्स ने लिया हुआ है. Please understand this. This is the amount of loan as a percentage of GDP that we've calculated. Let's say GDP was 100 rupees. Then we know that about 28 rupees the states have taken as a loan. Okay. This is important. This is not very important. Debt service ratio बहुत ज़्यादा important नहीं है. Okay. The outstanding market loans as a part of total debt are expected to reach 66%. Loans from the center have also increased due to loans offered to states for GST compensation. ये सब loans की बात कर रहे हैं. Contingent liabilities. Contingent liabilities are liabilities which are contingent or dependent on certain future happening. So it is saying that contingent liabilities of the states had gone down, but now they've again gone up, which means that there are some cases कुछ चल रहे होंगे कोर्ट में, वो सब केस हार गई सरकारें, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स, and now they have to pay back that money. So liabilities which could have arisen in the future have now arisen, and with that the contingent liabilities have increased to about 3.8% for the state governments. Not very relevant from our examination point of view. जो relevant था अभी वो मैंने आपको बता दिया. Okay. Deficit का अगर हम summarize करें, gross fiscal deficit of the states is very high. यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हो. As a value it's very high, but in percentage terms it is in control at the moment. तो अगर volume में या फिर in lakh crores we see it is about 8 lakh crores, 7.53 lakh crores, but in percentage terms it is about 2.8% of GDP, which is very very good. Okay. Revenue deficit आप देखोगे it is almost nil. तो हमने first slide में I think देखा था that the government is trying to eliminate revenue deficit, and you can see it here. Primary deficit is what? Primary deficit is fiscal deficit minus interest payment. So it is supposed to be always less than fiscal deficit. Primary deficit is also in control, 1.2%. Very good numbers. So this shows that here you can see the deficits are going down. It spiked up because of COVID, but it has been going down. Similarly, revenue deficit तो consistently नीचे जा रहा है, which is a good sign for the states. Okay. अब आ जाते हैं loans पे. हमने अभी deficit देखा. Deficit is nothing but loans, but deficit is expenditure minus revenue, and this gap of expenditure minus revenue is recovered by taking loans by the state governments. Okay. States debt is expected to decrease to about 30% of GDP in 22-23. ये total debt की बात कर रहे हैं. Total debt जो है सरकार का, state governments का, it is expected to be around 30% of GDP. Okay. Recommend कितना किया था इनकेसिंग कमेटी ने? About 20% of the GDP. That was the recommendation. 23-24 में 21 में 31% था. 24 में it is expected कि 27% के आसपास आ जाएगा. However, outstanding liabilities remain higher than 30% of gross state GDP. If the outstanding liabilities, it shows a negative sign. This means that the liabilities which are yet to be repaid are still about 30% of gross state GDP. तो हमारा जो total loan है states का, that is still very high. Deficit for that year might be less. आपको ये समझना जरूरी है difference. What is deficit? कि हमने 2023-2024 का जो डेटा है उसमें मैंने एज द गवर्नमेंट आई अर्नड 100 रुपीज़, मेरे एक्सपेंडिचर्स थे लेट्स से 150 रुपये, डिफरेंस कितना हुआ 50 रुपीज़. दिस इज माई डेफिसिट फॉर दिस ईयर. ओके. और डेफिसिट कितना आ रहा है हमारा? अबाउट 2.8% ऑफ GDP. ओके. बट मैंने पास्ट में भी कुछ लोन लिया था. मैंने लास्ट ईयर 50 रुपये डेफिसिट था, उससे लास्ट ईयर 60 रुपीज़ डेफिसिट था, लास्ट ईयर 70 रुपीज़ डेफिसिट था. व्हेन यू ऐड ऑल ऑफ दिस वॉट एवर हैज नॉट बीन पेड, this amounts to around 29% of GDP. So 2.8% of GDP is the fiscal deficit of this year, but 29%, about 10 times of this is the total debt of the state governments. So it is very high. Fiscal deficit is going down, but the loans of the state governments are still very high. I hope this is clear. Okay. Tax devolution forms the largest part of transfers, but grants have increased due to more centrally sponsored schemes. Loans shared had declined but increased again, not very important. डिविजिबल पूल मैंने आपको बताया था कि फाइनेंस कमीशन ने बताया था, तो द डिविजिबल पूल हैज वाइडन्ड. नाउ अबाउट 42% ऑफ द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट्स रेवेन्यूज, टैक्स रेवेन्यूज आर ट्रांसफर्ड टू द स्टेट्स, डिवॉल्व टू द स्टेट्स. दिस इज कॉल्ड एज वर्टिकल डिवोल्यूशन. ओके, इसमें क्या क्या आता है? जब हम फाइनेंस कमीशन का कभी पढ़ेंगे तो डिटेल में पढ़ेंगे. एरियाज लाइक पॉपुलेशन एरिया, फॉरेस्ट कवर, इनकम डिस्टेंस, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, tax effort, fiscal discipline, all these are parameters through which you decide how much one state will get. Let me explain it through a very brief example. Let's say the central government earned 100 rupees as tax revenue. Now it has to give 42 rupees to all the states. 28 states को 42 rupees देने हैं. Now it is a difficult task. How do you decide कि हरियाणा को कितना मिलेगा, दिल्ली को कितना मिलेगा? How much will Maharashtra get? How much will UP get? There has to be a method to decide. This method is called as criteria for horizontal devolution. You use these parameters to decide. Let's say based upon these parameters, it comes out that Haryana should get 10%, Delhi should get 15%, UP should get 20%. This is how you decide who will get how much out of this 42 rupees. So 10% to Haryana, that means 4.2 rupees. UP 20%, that means 8.4 rupees. Okay, so this is how you decide based upon horizontal devolution how much will each state get. Okay, this is all that is talked about here. Cess क्या होता है? Cess and surcharge are special taxes. It's a specific tax that is imposed by government for specific purposes. Okay, both cess and surcharge revenue are solely under the central government's control. According to 270, the revenue collected from both cess and surcharge is at exclusive disposal. Now, there is a negative thing that's happening here. The central government is putting a lot of taxes under cess. वो क्या करते हैं? टैक्स से हटा के, उसको जीएसटी से हटा के या फिर टैक्स से हटा के यहाँ से निकाल के सेस में डाल दिया. Why are they doing it? Because GST तो शेयर करना पड़ेगा. You will have to share it with the states. But the cess belongs only to the central government. You do not have to, you have the power to levy it and you don't even have to share it. So this is a wrong thing that is happening. The central government is starting to use more of cess and surcharge. Okay, cess revenue escalated from 6.4% to 17.7%. ये इंपॉर्टेंट है, समझ आ गया ना? तो ये सब के नाम पे द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट इज टेकिंग डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ सेसेस और ये स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को पास ऑन नहीं होता है. दे आर एबल टू यूज इट दैट देयर ओन विम्स एंड फैंसीज. खुद स्कीम्स चलाते हैं, उनके थ्रू स्पेंड करते हैं अलग अलग स्टेट्स में, बट दे डू नॉट हैव टू पास इट टू द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट. द फंड रिमेन्स विद द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट. ओके, not very important. This is important. Due to increased cess and surcharge, the divisible pool has diminished from 86% to about 78%, impacting tax devolution to states. I hope this is clear to you. What is happening? GST हो गया और कोई taxes हो गए, इन सब के थ्रू let's say the central government was, cess भी हो गया, central government was getting 100 rupees, cess अलग हो गया. cess के थ्रू central government was able to levy let's say 15 rupees. अब जीएसटी के कुछ एलिमेंट्स हैं, कुछ अलग अलग टैक्सेस हैं, वो निकाल के यहाँ से सेस में डाल दिए. What has happened? This has increased to let's say 25 and this has fallen to 90. Only this needs to be shared with the states. This need not be shared with the states. Only the central government can use it. They do not have any responsibility to share it with the states. So this is what is happening, which might affect the fiscal strength or fiscal health of the states in the future. I hope this is clear. यहाँ तक clear है? Just give me a thumbs up if this is clear till here. RBI सजेशन पे आ जाते हैं. This is important here. RBI ने क्या क्या सजेशन दिए? Number 1, increase in capital expenditure. There has been an improvement in state finances due to reduction in revenue deficit. जो मैंने बताया, revenue deficit is around 0.3%, which is very less. This was further improved by an increase in capital expenditure, which showed a favorable fiscal outlook. कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इंप्रूव हुआ है. सो दिस इज अ गुड साइन. व्हाई? बिकॉज आपका रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट कम हो रहा है. दैट मीन्स योर रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर्स आर ईदर फॉलिंग और योर रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स आर इंक्रीजिंग. Your capital expenditure is increasing, which is a good sign because this means that you're spending on infrastructure development or capital development, which might give you returns, good returns in the future. Increase in revenue. Revenue जो states का है, that has gone up. Number one, according to the RBI. OPS is a burden for the states. किसी ने पूछा था, कुछ स्टूडेंट ने कुछ दिन पहले, OPS सर, what has RBI said about OPS in state finance report? बस इतना ही बोला है कि OPS की वजह से you will have a very big burden on the states, will have a very big burden on their finances, about 4.5 times of NPS, reaching to about 0.9% of GDP by 2060. बस ये नंबर याद करने की जरूरत है. OPS वर्सेस NPS I've already discussed, वहां पे भी मैंने नंबर्स डिस्कस किए थे. The RBI says please stop freebies. Some states have budgeted for fiscal deficit exceeding 4%. Combined कितना 2.8, किसी किसी स्टेट का 4% से ज्यादा है. ऑल इंडिया एवरेज का एक्सपेक्टेड इन 23-24 इज 3.1%. तो आरबीआई सेइंग प्लीज रिड्यूस दीज फ्रीबीज. ओके. इंक्रीज द टैक्स बेस. टैक्स बेस इंक्रीज करना मतलब मोर एंड मोर पीपल शुड बी ईदर फोर्स्ड और शुड बी इंसेंटिवाइज्ड टू पे टैक्सेस. टैक्स इवेजन कम करो, टैक्स बेस बढ़ाओ, कन्विंस मोर एंड मोर पीपल टू पे टैक्सेस ऑनेस्टली. ओके. तो ये आरबीआई ने स्टेट्स को बोला है. दे कैन बी अ क्वेश्चन इन फेज 2 ऑल्सो कि व्हाट आर द आरबीआई सजेशंस टू द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स एज पर स्टेट फाइनेंस रिपोर्ट. रिपोर्ट से इस बार क्वेश्चंस आए हैं 2023 में. दे कैन बी क्वेश्चंस इन 2024 एज वेल. प्लीज रिमेंबर दैट. ओके. एसेट मोनेटाइजेशन. स्टेट्स कैन इंक्रीज नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू बाय मोनेटाइजिंग देयर एसेट्स. मोनेटाइजिंग एसेट्स मैंने आपको बताया था एक लैंड मोनेटाइजेशन का एग्जांपल. तो थ्रू दिस द स्टेट्स कैन इंक्रीज देयर नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. ओके. ये आरबीआई ने बोला है स्टेट्स को प्लीज स्टार्ट डूइंग दिस. प्रिवेंटिंग इलीगल माइनिंग एक्टिविटीज कि भाई टेक्नोलॉजी को यूज करो लाइक ज्योग्राफिकल इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम, ड्रोन सर्वेज, so that you can stop illegal mining because you're losing money because of all these things. Okay. Conditional transfers based on reform. RBI said the Finance Commission as well as the central government should come out with a reform in how they devolve money. So that transfer to the state government should be conditional based on reform the state governments are bringing out. If the state governments are carrying out reforms, then only they should be given a part of the devolution that they're supposed to get. तो हमने जो पैरामीटर्स देखे थे ना कि फाइनेंस कमीशन ने बोले पॉपुलेशन, एरिया, फिस्कल डिसिप्लिन एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा, उसमें आप रिफॉर्म भी ऐड करो इफ इट इज नॉट एडेड. दिस इज व्हाट द आरबीआई हैज सेड एंड यू मेक द ट्रांसफर कंडीशनल. इफ देयर इज नो रिफॉर्म, लिमिटेड रिफॉर्म, नो ट्रांसफर. ओके. India's diverse topography poses climate vulnerabilities with 9 states at risk. States must focus on climate action. ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. आरबीआई ने बोला है कि भाई क्लाइमेट का एक अलग बजट निकालो so that you start spending money, start investing money on climate action. Okay. Climate finance, integrating climate finance into fiscal planning through performance-based incentives, additional grants, and separate head for climate-related investment projects with the scheme for special assistance to states for capital investment. ये बोल रहे हैं कि क्लाइमेट का एक तो बजट अलग से बनाओ. Okay. Number one, so that whatever investments you're making, whatever expenses you're making, whatever total expenses you want to make, उसमें से कुछ climate projects के लिए जाए. And whatever expenses you're already making, उसमें ये भी पता लगे, you should know how much impact it is supposed to have on the climate. Second, climate finance. They're saying whatever fiscal planning you're going to make, fiscal planning मतलब planning of where do we want to spend our money. From where do we want to earn our revenues? Let's say you're earning your revenues from fossil fuel consumption, oil. You want to reduce this. Even if it is still high, you want to reduce this. You're earning a lot of revenue from sin goods like let's say cigarettes or alcohol. Okay. You want to reduce this. Even if it is very high and your state is dependent upon it, you want to reduce this. So you want to reduce your earnings from these kind of activities. And you want to increase your expenses or expenditures on activities which are climate friendly. तो अपने climate finance को improve करने की कोशिश करो यहाँ पे. That is what the RBI has said. I hope the difference between climate finance and climate budget is clear. बहुत simple है. Okay. Information system, which means using more and more technology so that you're able to, whatever projects you have, you're able to, for example, direct benefit transfer. Now that helps information to transfer from the central government at the top to the ration shop at the bottom. Yeah, this guy needs this amount of ration. Through Aadhaar card, you're able to do all of that. Okay. Or direct benefit transfer ke through, you're able to transfer the money into his account. That is an information system that you've created. So you need to strengthen your information platforms. जैसे कि PIB एक platform है which belongs to the central government. Through that, the central government is able to tell the people what it is planning on doing and what it has done. The state government should also have something similar so that the people in the state become more empowered, become more, start contributing more towards the state's development. State's information improves. So all these things need transparency, need a stronger information system in the states as well. तो ये 10 पॉइंट्स बताए हैं आरबीआई ने स्टेट्स को इन द स्टेट फाइनेंस रिपोर्ट 2023. स्टेट फाइनेंस रिपोर्ट दिखने में बहुत कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव लगती है, बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स लगती है, बट इट इज नॉट सो कॉम्प्लेक्स. I will also come out with a document which is almost final. I'm just restructuring it and I'll put it on Telegram in the next 3-4 days. I'll put this PDF also on Telegram. मेरे चैनल पे चले जाओगे तो वहाँ पे इस सेशन के बाद मिल जाएगी. This PDF, this PPT will also be very helpful, but I will also share with you the detailed PDF. उसमें मेजॉरिटी चीज़ें आपको कवर्ड मिलेंगी कि एग्जैक्टली स्टेट फाइनेंस रिपोर्ट में क्या क्या बोला गया है. वो सारी चीज़ें आपको सब मिल जाएंगी. That will help you a lot in your preparation of the upcoming exam. It looks very complex, but it is not very complex. थोड़े से numbers ज़्यादा हैं, heavy ज़्यादा है, but it is doable. 2-3 बार पढ़ोगे तो हो जाएगा. ठीक है ना? ठीक है. चलिए. 1 घंटे से I've been speaking, so I would now like to close the session. Mentorship sessions I hope are doing well, are going well for all the enrolled students. Regularly हम लोग कर रहे हैं because the exam is coming near. तो जैसे जैसे एग्जाम पास आता है मेंटरशिप सेशन जो है वो अच्छे से होना चाहिए. यू शुड पार्टिसिपेट इन देम. अपने डाउट्स पूछो वहाँ आके, दूसरों के डाउट सुनो. दैट इज गोइंग टू बी वेरी वेरी हेल्पफुल फॉर यू. ठीक है ना? जितने रेगुलरली हम आपको पढ़ा रहे हैं उतना रेगुलरली आपने पढ़ लिया तो आपका सिलेक्शन होना ही होना है. प्लीज़ मेक श्योर ऑफ दैट. ठीक है. चलिए, लेट्स क्लोज द सेशन. आई विल सी यू अगेन ऑन ट्यूसडे. तब तक तबीयत ठीक हो जाएगी तो और अच्छा सेशन करने की कोशिश करेंगे.